Hello and welcome everybody. Once again, I'm with the very, very cool Mr. Bob Smith from 60 Skills, and we've got a fantastic conversation today. It's one of my absolute favorite discoveries in the last number of years, and it's so big and expansive, and so we're going to do the best we can to touch upon it with as much as we can. And so we're going to be talking about the system of Kabbalah as presented by one Mr. Franz Bardon in his book, The Key to the True Kabbalah. So welcome, Bob. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Of course. As always, I appreciate the invite. And let's ask away, man. See where the conversation can take us today.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's just get straight into it. So my first question is, what is Kabbalah writ large, and what distinguishes the system of Kabbalah that Franz Bardon offers?
Right. Okay. This is where you can get into some potentially uncomfortable cultural, historical stuff. Okay. So Kabbalah is a Jewish religious mystical tradition element. There's no getting around that in terms of the classical definition of what it is. But now that leads us to Franz Bardon stuff. What Franz Bardon was trying to give people was a universal tuning fork system for doing magic that wasn't spirit magic. So something where you as the individual are in charge, not some greater intelligence working through you. Simply put, it's the combination of color, sound, and sensation at a minimum to generate a force. So if you look at all of the perspective energies in existence as this kind of wavelength, right? Not unlike EMF or UAV, whatever, UVA, UVB, etc., etc. Okay. By using color, sound, and sensation, you can identify a landmark on that spectrum of energies. And these energies, in turn, make up physical reality as you and I know it. Now, as individuals, we are limited in the amount of this we can work with. So I'm not going to be raising mountains from the ground anytime soon. As I often refer to it, I often feel like a monkey banging away at God's keyboard. It's God's keyboard. I'm just a monkey randomly punching numbers. Fair enough. But that's essentially the heart of it. It's a tuning fork system that allows you to identify and work with and replicate the fundamental energies that the universe is created out of. Now, a good discussion in this is, do the letters themselves even really exist? I would argue at the end of the day, exclusive of any egregoric buildup, the answer is actually no. They're just signposts on this spectrum of energies. But because these systems have been used for a long time, whether you're talking Kabbalah from Judaism or some of the Hindu yogic stuff or some of the Tibetan stuff, or you name it, they're these huge energetic constructs built up around their individual characters that add additional power and flavor and intelligence to it, kind of like we were talking about from the egregore standpoint. Mm-hmm. Also keep in mind, color, sound, and sensation are not the only ways you can tune into this. You can use positive and negative breath holds. You can use emotion. You can use music. You can use a lot of different things. And so you can use lines of force as well, electric or magnetic. You have to use at least 3 of these things to really make it work. And the sound and sensation aspect of it, as well as color, pretty much hit up the clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient aspects of that energy. So if you're doing it that way, you can hear it, you can see it, and you can feel it. With some of these other methods, that may not be as easy to do. Does that make sense?
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you. And you're right, like when you're talking about the primordial elements and building blocks of creation and our attempt to try and grasp, what they are at a fundamental level. I mean, we are kind of limited in our ability to perceive things, aren't we? So, you know, when we're, I guess what my sort of view on it at the moment is my conclusion is that we're presently is, and it's fluid, of course, is that there's these things that have some kind of separation. I know there's a bit of overlap between some of them,
Right.
and we kind of create a sympathetic resonance with each one of our three bodies, and it allows us to sort of get a hand on it here, get a hand on it here, and get a hand on it here.
Right.
And then it's like, you know, not every, you know, most people can't pick up a basketball with one hand. They need two hands type of thing.
Right.
So it's a loose kind of analogy towards that. And so, yeah, thank you for that. And so, yeah, you know, that sort of covered a couple of the other questions.
Oh.
Now, obviously the tree of life features in, it's related now. Yeah, can you touch on the tree of life for us? I'd love to hear your conversation on this.
Tree of life is definitely informed by Judaism. You know, the Christians have their own form of this, and you see this in a lot of Golden Dawn work and a lot of other things. It's curious in that each of the Sephiro on that tree of life can represent a planetary force. Okay. They can each manifest at 4 different levels of reality. Okay. There's a lot of overlap with the different energies involved. You know, in many ways, these can represent chakras as well, if you want to make that extrapolation. So again, it's often hard to differentiate between what's the physical reality that something represents, right? And what's the energetic or egregoric buildup around that results in something else. So, you know, like when you look at the curriculum that I teach in the 60 skill system, fine. We start off working with the elements very early. Why? So we can establish equilibrium and begin to differentiate between different energies. And doing this teaches you how to identify different energies and how to repeat them and all this other kind of stuff. Right. Okay. We also work a lot with the separate bodies so you can identify what level of reality you're working with something at. Okay. And when you can do all that, okay, now you can do magic. Great. The tree of life represents all of this. Now, for someone who is not coming at this from the perspective of Jewish religious Kabbalah practice, okay, the best book I can recommend on the tree of life is actually Paths of Wisdom by John Michael Greer. He goes into exquisite detail regarding what each of the different Sephiro do, their different levels of reality, their positive and negative aspects, the pathways between them, and the kinds of experiences that you're going to encounter when you're exploring that. That's something that Bardon didn't really address directly in his works. If you give a careful reading of his second and third book, he's definitely talking about this kind of stuff. But again, you know, he died early, unfortunately. And, you know, his third book was definitely not completed before he did, quite possibly his second as well. We also know from historical record that his private practice group did a lot more with ritual magic than the 3 books that he released deal with. So it's fair to say this was on his mind. And again, it's a way to represent reality. It's not the only way to represent reality, but it is a way to do it, and it works fairly well. But yeah, if you want to learn more about the spheres themselves and how they interact with the planets and all this other kind of business, definitely check out Paths of Wisdom by Greer. Excellent resource.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's really great. You're right. I find that, you know, having a dense model to sort of explore and flesh out, that's pretty time tested. It's, you know, like it's quite deep, and
Sure.
you know, there's so much to explore, and that kind of, I'll be going into that in a little bit too, because, you know, the long game with, you know, Bardon system, it goes on, doesn't it? You know, so, but anyway, all right. So here's one. Okay, 27 versus 22. Okay.
Sure.
Are there more letters? Please.
Yeah. Again, if you view the letters as signpost on a spectrum, okay, there's no need to be limited to 22. In fact, I've spoken with some people out of Asia who come from systems that have 50 some odd and 84 in one case.
Oh, wow.
So now, again, this allows for more specificity, which, that can be useful. All right. Or maybe the specificity is just too much detail, particularly for somebody new to it. Again, I'm not going to wade in on that whole argument, but there are other systems out there that utilize this ball above head methodology that have many different letter numbers, depending upon how you tune it. Now, again, keep in mind, if you use the Hebrew characters or the Sanskrit characters or Chinese characters for these different, fundamental letter-based energies, you're going to get a whole lot of stuff with that as well. You're not really going to get with Bardon's system, because Bardon's system is essentially cleaner. It's doesn't have much of an egregoric buildup. Now, care of my work and the work of some other people, like Mark Rasmus, that's beginning to change. We're beginning to come up with this Bardon-esque egregoric patterned letter magic. Okay. But people have been using the Sanskrit characters for this stuff for thousands of years. So there's a lot there. How much of that is the fundamental energy itself, and how much is that cultural buildup? That's hard to say. But if you can do ball above head and work with 3-point concentration, you can explore the Hebrew and the Sanskrit stuff and even the Chinese stuff very easily. It's not much of a challenge.
Is there a discernment skill set that can be developed that can sort of cleanly separate egregoric buildup, baggage, etc., if like a bit of a term, and the cleanliness of like the cleaner aspects of the letters, etc.?
Only in comparison.
Yeah.
Because again, when you link into something like that, right, you become that. So, it's when you're in the moment, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
That's the short answer.
Yeah.
And that's Mom. So, hi, Mom.
Hey, Mom.
But it's that's the hard part is, when you're in the moment, any discernment you might have is very difficult to pull off. Afterwards, when you're looking at it, you're comparing your notes and doing all this other kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. That's much easier to go, oh, okay, here's the difference between the two. Mm-hmm. But again, if you're dealing with two old systems like Jewish Kabbalah and, I don't know, some Hindu yogic Sanskrit system, the difference you're going to see isn't the fundamental underlying thing. It's the difference between these two very old systems that have a lot of buildup around them. Stripping things out to their base constituents is sometimes fairly easy. So say you're doing a deity fusion practice with breath retention. Okay, then you just do the breath retention technique and you leave out the deity fusion part. Then you can compare the difference, right? Okay. If you're doing, say, the Hebrew letters, right, for Kabbalistic purposes, if you leave out the character itself and maybe just go with the sound, sensation, and color, maybe that would work. I don't know. But the second you put that character above your head, you're going to get whatever comes with the character. So that's, again, I've had some success in figuring this stuff out in different systems, but it's always tricky.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Here we go. Let's get into a big chunk here, and that is, why would someone want to learn Bardon's system? Mm-hmm. Now, there's obviously benefits in regards to just doing the system itself, and then there's also for people who are starting on the IIH track, the Initiation into Hermetics track, which is Bardon's first book, it can be sort of practiced alongside that. And it also ticks a lot of the boxes of the things you need to do in an initiation into Hermetics quite nicely. It's actually quite a nice thing. And that's where that sort of 1-3-2 approach to the Bardon system comes in. So, yeah, I'd love to hear about, just to start with, why would someone want to learn Bardon's system in regards to just the benefits of doing Key to the True Kabbalah in itself?
Right. It's fairly clean. That's the main thing, is there's very little buildup around it. So the impact on your free will isn't very high. 2, it gives you a skill set that can be extrapolated to practical things very quickly outside a religious context. This is the problem with a lot of systems, right? Is they're hedged by this huge religious framework, which can be beneficial or not so much, depending upon where that comes from. So that's an issue. It's also a universal system in that anybody can do Bardon's stuff. I don't have to be born into a specific family from a specific place with the right lineage and initiated under a full moon when I was 9 years old or any of that other kind of craziness. It's a universal system. IAH, absent the body training, which quite frankly is its main weakness, has about 60 to 70 odd skills in it. These are the universal skills in meditative practice that you have to safely do things like spirit magic or work with the letters or what have you. Now, the nice thing about Bardon's Kabbalah or letter magic in general is you can go to work with that very, very, very quickly. It's very useful, very fast, assuming you have the proper body training to bring it down into that more astral and physical, vital kind of level of existence. So it's probably a rambling answer, but did that answer your question, Phil, or were you looking for something else?
Well, I have got some bullet points of specificity underneath that I'd like to talk
Okay.
about in the form of use cases for specific applications. Now, but this is more to do with obviously, how. So there's a bunch of I'll call them professions or applications in the real world. So, for example, how can, say, healers, both esoteric and sort of conventional medical practitioners, take advantage of this practice?
Sure. Bardon did us a real favor, and Dexheimer gets into a little detail with this. If you go look at the 2-letter combinations or even the single letters themselves, Bardon will tell you the organs that are associated with that. He'll also give you some medical conditions that can be used to treat with. So this becomes a very useful tool very, very quickly. For example, I believe the CA letter combination helps with asthmatic type issues, air sensitivity, this kind of thing. The letter L deals with vitality writ large. The letter N has an association with the liver. So if you're dealing with somebody who has poor liver function, letter N type work tends to help. So this is, in terms of a medical standpoint, an example of how it can be very useful very quickly, assuming, of course, you've done the work to be able to differentiate between the different kinds of energetic phenomena you need to work with. Because, listen, as a former medical practitioner, the truth of the matter is patients tend to get better unless they're really old or what they're dealing with is really terminal. And so in a lot of cases, the medical intervention you're doing is there to either speed things up or to help people out with things that they can't heal on their own. So the result of which energy medicine tends to be very effective. You just give that guy or gal a little bit more of a push and things tend to resolve themselves in a reasonable amount of time. So again, for medicine, yeah, if you're into traditional medicine or herbal medicine or spagyrics or any of that kind of stuff, this kind of thing becomes very useful very quickly.
Excellent. Thank you. What about for martial artists, internal martial artists, hard forms and internalists?
Yeah, for sure. Well, in that case, working with the electric and magnetic lines of force is where you want to start, because that's going to increase your ability to put your body weight into a very small area of focus quickly. But I'll give you examples. Letter Z increases athletic endurance work. Notably, the body feels lighter, so you can run farther. Okay. Letter D deals with explosive strength. The letter I deals with that kind of elastic tendon strength that you see demonstrated by a lot of Olympic type weightlifters. So all this stuff can be carried over very, very quickly. Now, again, as we talk about frequently, if your fundamentals and basics aren't down, if you're not in shape, haven't done your combinations, haven't learned all that other kind of stuff, so you can actually hit a guy, this stuff isn't going to help you. But it can give you that extra 5 or 10% if you have done all the other training. And it's also very useful for injury recovery and recovery from stuff, from wounds and stuff like that. So again, really just the sky's the limit in terms of application.
Cool. Okay. Now, so I had a bunch of others, but we'll just keep moving here because I have some other questions at the end. So in regards to practicing it alongside initiation into Hermetics, now my understanding is that obviously an initiation into Hermetics, a big part of that is the which I haven't found a lot of other systems, is this element training where you're essentially turning yourself into a mixing pot,
right,
and you're training this the sensation body, which
right,
is that that sort of emotional, sensational type thing. And you're doing this primarily to start with as part of the pathway to develop astral equilibrium, which sort of opens other doors.
Sure.
Now, I'd just love to hear what you've got to say about how KTQ can benefit the IIH process.
We have to remember that anytime you engage in 3-part concentration, right, you're also working things like your single point of focus skills. All the extra energy liberated is going to help your clairvoyant and clairaudient skills. So again, there's a lot of carryover to that. Now, the way I was taught by Mark Rasmus is I was taught the elements as Kabbalah. So I kind of started on day one, not really knowing what the hell I was doing, by the way. Just kind of worked out that way. So they actually work together very, very well. Because again, functionally, when you get your basic skills down, the enlightenment path doesn't take that long. After you're done with that, you want to do something with this stuff because you've got this huge investment of time and effort in it. Well, Kabbalah is kind of how you do this stuff. And a lot of guys get wrapped up with IIH in terms of this. It's a decades-long quest and all this other kind of stuff. But IIH is essentially learning to drive a car. Kabbalah is having somewhere to go and something to do once you drive the car. And so that's where they benefit each other, because if you can generate utility with things quickly, well, then you have a reason to actually do them. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a very valuable sort of viewpoint. I found that, having a container to pour all this work into so that it has an application, it gives me a reason. It's not just another thing I do in the day.
Right.
Mark Rasmus made a beautiful set of videos talking about integrating Hermetics into daily life. And, this thing about like trying to sell meditation to the average Joe on the street. He's like, man, he says, bro, I've got to come home and feed the cat and mow the lawns and do the dishes and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, if like a little bit of Qigong theory, a little bit of Tai Chi, a little bit of Hermetics and that, you can start to basically, I'm doing the vacuuming the other day and I'm just like going, oh yeah. And then I just move into the fascia. I was like, oh yeah, sweet. I'm working the electric and magnetic lines of force while I'm doing the vacuuming, So this is it, and so but as far as like a and we'll get to sort of more use cases at the end of the chat, but yeah, as far as IIH goes, I have to say that after here, because it was you that brought it up actually in one of your videos, or it was a chat somewhere talking about, because obviously I think, when we were speaking before about how there's egregoric buildups with some of these older systems, and Bardon systems obviously not that old really in the grand scale of things. And he also, if you follow his works to the letter, you have to do some serious lifting to get to the third book. And that's essentially like gatekeeping, like vetting out and keeping out the riffraff, I guess, or something like this.
Yeah,
and that can be a way, to sort of keep it tidy in that too. And he obviously places a lot of emphasis on ethical development, moral development, and coming to understand these, I guess, too, from a cosmically or universally lawful perspective, so that you're aware of your actions. And so by the time you start, you get behind the wheel of the car, so to speak, you have a good understanding of like of maybe etiquette in a sense, or how to play.
Yeah, what I'll say about that is there was a gentleman who died a few years ago by the name of Felix Dennis. May have heard of him, may not have heard of him. He was responsible for Computer Shopper UK and a bunch of lads magazines out of the UK, like Maxim magazine and a bunch of other things. Felix died ridiculously wealthy. I think he was worth like $400 million when he died or something like that. Anyway, growing up from nothing, he didn't come out of money. And he wrote this hilarious book called How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. Most biographical business books are terrible. It's all, all half truths, all, fight the good fight and blah, 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 moral leadership and all this kind of stuff. All right. Felix wrote a book that was completely unfiltered about, what the process is actually like and everything involved with that. And a hilarious, if not R-rated or a little bit worse book, because Felix had cocaine problems and reportedly drank something like $3 million worth of wine during the course of his life and all this other stuff. But the point that he got to is that once you've reached a base level of success, everybody goes through what he calls the barmy stage, where you just misbehave. And you just act like a jerk, and that's just part of it, because now you actually have the ability to act like a jerk. Right? And his whole point is just try to compress that down to the smallest period of time possible, because it's just a waste of time and effort, and there are other things you need to go do. Okay. Magic is the same way. Everybody has ever gotten a hold of their own Akasha, non-dual light, and learned how to apply this in the real world via something like the letters, has gone on to act like an ass for at least some amount of time. The feedback you get from that and the bills you pay from that generally result in people figuring out this is dumb, right? And then they become the people who they are. Yeah, I can't tell you how many guys I've met who got into magic to supercharge their pickup artist skills. And then 3 years later, if you ask them about that, they're all just really embarrassed. So, hey man, I understand there's a bit of controversy, as the Brits would say, regarding my presence in the Bardon community, because I actually talk about these things, and I'm like, hey, we're real people living in the real world. Come on, man, but, backtracking a little bit, going back to the world Bardon was coming out of, where, you'd had the Nazis who had a real interest in esoteric and the occult, and he'd been hunted and thrown in prison for a while and tortured and all this other kind of business. It's easy to see how he would make a big deal about that. Okay. But here's what gets left out. And I say this all the time. Even in our own community, people treat this magic stuff like it's something special. Okay. The founding fathers of the U.S. were all Masons. They were all ritual magicians. And they created a new form of government that's gone on to revolutionize how people comport their affairs worldwide through elected representation. Guys, this stuff isn't that uncommon. It's just not. You look back in any historical period in any society, and there's tons of this stuff going on in the background. Why? Because it's useful. You know, it's like any other piece of technology. I can use this flashlight to light the dark, right? Or I can use it to sneak up on my neighbor, blind him in the middle of the night, and steal his wallet. Flashlight, right? Torch. And so that's... I just lost your audio, mate.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I was going to say, like, it's for someone that flashlight would have been a form of magic within itself, and a non-understood technology.
Right. So in terms of this, KTQ makes things useful very quickly. And to be frank, the best practitioners are people out there that the Magic Club will never meet. They're never going to do a YouTube video. These guys and gals are never going to promote themselves. You're never going to see them on TikTok. Because they learned how to do this stuff a long time ago. They're actively applying it towards their lives. And they're not teachers. So, to the degree anybody ever hears about people like this, it's when Uncle Joe dies and they're clearing out his house and they find 15 journals devoted to alchemy. And it turns out he was some baller alchemist. Okay.
I love it.
Whatever. So yeah, man. That's kind of my feeling on that. And a lot of people in the community think I'm a dick for, saying the obvious out loud, but there you go.
Yeah, and I want to say too that I come from a line of community servicemen in my family, and there were a lot of hard decisions that had to be made to get things moving along, and people are grateful in the long term. Now, I'm not going to say that about I don't want to go on about that, but what I want to say is that as far as being an energetic practitioner or like an energy healer goes, the more I can become aware of, I want to get better at my job, basically. Sure. I just, and like, if you're dealing with universal forces and it's like, well, I just can't help it. I just love this stuff so much and I love to share, and I share with an open heart, and that seems to work out well. I don't seem to be getting slapped on the wrist by the purple, if you know what I'm saying. So, and I do know that when I do get that, when that happens though, that stands out to me. So, it's a lot, like you said about the Felix Dennis conversation. I had that as a musician. I went through this, hey, look at me, everybody, ain't I cool? And then when I started teaching kids, I realized, man, these kids are really impressionable. I got up my game, and I certainly got my ass kicked a few times with that. And so the opportunity to grow up certainly is folded into this. Right. So thank you so much for that, because this is a really good conversation to have, because I think, this stuff is coming out more and more. This community is growing. This arena is emerging more into the public sphere. Okay, compatibility and complementarity. That's not a word. Compatibility and complementary with other systems and traditions. Like, just case in point, say, okay, so I'm a Reiki teacher and practitioner, which for me is really not a specific system. It's my developing of my healing method. And it just used the Japanese word, just like shampoo is the word we use for hair cleaner, in a sense.
Sure.
So it doesn't say that I completely divorce myself from the system and the elements that made up the system that most people know, because there's value in that. But KDQ and Reiki.
Again, Reiki could easily just be KTQ without the spirit magic.
Yeah.
And once you learn that ball above head method and you understand how sigils and 3-point concentration work, a lot of mystery regarding a whole lot of other things just goes away. And it's not helped by the fact that most of the people writing the books are academics. They're not practitioners. They don't know this stuff. And so they have to fall back on the things that are written down and cultural, cultural, anthropological context, and yeah. None of which has anything to do with the actual practice of magic. And so it can take you down some really weird corners, particularly when you're dealing with an individual who has no religious beliefs, or maybe has religious beliefs that are a little on the strong end, is a strict materialist who doesn't recognize the energetic level of reality. And then they come up with really weird interpretations of what's going on. I mean, listen, the fact that the founding fathers of the American government were all a bunch of ritual magicians who structured the development of DC along the lines of, ancient Rome. How is that left out of the conversation? Half the books at Newton's estate sale were on alchemy and Hermetic magic. We only have them because some guy fortunately bought them before they were simply going to be thrown out, because people were only interested in his mathematic work. So they're in some private library down in Jerusalem. Yeah, again, it's like we talked about the other day. Your beliefs don't change reality, but your beliefs change how you engage with reality and what parts of it you can see and what parts of it you cannot. And unfortunately, that's true of a lot of things. So IIH and KTQ are almost universal technologies that can be applied anywhere. So say you're a Reiki guy, right? Getting better at your single pointed focus, getting better at your visualization skills, all of which are usually done using the IIH curriculum, would benefit your Reiki practice. There's no question about this. Where the difficulty comes in is book 2 of Bardon's work on spirit magic. That's where, depending upon somebody's religious or cultural background, they may or may not have problems with what's contained in that book. That's really the beginning and end of it, as far as I can tell, Phil.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah. It's funny, everything's good until you get to that one thing that makes you, oh, hang on, no, I can't go there. No, I can't cross that line. And it's like, it's a thing, and that's all it is. It's a piece of data or information. I know that some people will look at IIH and they'll see the conversation about things like Ouija boards or pendulums and wax dolls and go, oh, well, just leave that out then. If you can recognize the universality, of single point concentration, and how these sort of training aspects are found in just about all the traditions,
Right.
and I think that anyone with who's genuinely on a quest for understanding, I think comparative analysis of traditions and the practices, not just from an academic or intellectual understanding, because I've done that and that got me nowhere. Well, actually, I won't say that. It certainly gave me experiences like when I first started studying Kabbalah, like the Jewish and the Golden Dawn type systems. That certainly opened some doors, but it wasn't until I got more into practice-related stuff, because there's plenty of people out there that know stuff, but they don't practice stuff.
That's right.
And that's a line that I found in even the Reiki community. Lots of people know stuff and they are practicing, and people get good at things just by doing them as well. But then there's all of these practices you can do, which is basically doing the reps in the background, not on the job. It's like band practice, and as a muso, you don't learn the song at band practice. You do it before band practice, and then you show up and then you work on with the band. You already know the song.
Right.
Now you've got to work on arrangements and things like that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's keep moving here. Okay. Here we go. Secondary gains of training. Now we did talk about this a little bit, but essentially, practicing, practicing holding a color, practicing holding a sensation, and practicing a sound. These are essentially training concentration and flexibility of the three bodies, which you do in the IIH program at a much you do it much simpler there. The third book sort of takes and basically says, well, you've done the other stuff, so this stuff should be reasonably straightforward for you. So are there any other types of secondary gains from the KTQ training?
So KTQ, again, holding that color is going to train your clairvoyance. Holding that sound is going to train your clairaudience. Holding that sensation is going to train your clairsentience. And those are just minimums. Okay, there's a lot more that goes on there. And keep in mind, each one of those fundamental skills in IIH can probably be trained about half a dozen different ways.
Yep.
I largely use a clairsentience-based approach because that's what I'm good at. Ta-da! But there are other approaches, and particularly as a musician, you can come up with a lot of really interesting stuff involving sound and its uses within the context of KTQ. That would just never occur to me because I'm not one. Right? I'm not a musician. That's where I would tell people a doctrinal approach to things isn't helpful. Again, Arnold Schwarzenegger, you have to learn the rules before you break the rules, right? So you actually have to learn how to play. But I'm one guy. Bardon was one guy. Mark Rasmus is one guy. Phil Rice is one guy. Newton is one guy. Albert Einstein is one guy. Paracelsus is one guy. Pythagoras is one guy. Okay. The Buddha is one guy. All these people are going to have their individual things they're better at and things that they're worse at, and their individual take on things as a result of who they are. But that's as true in the present as it was 2,600 years ago. People really need to keep that in mind. And I understand the joy of finding something that really works for a person, right? And they finally find this stuff and like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for umpteen million years, right? Okay, fine. But there's still systems constructed by and implemented by man. And so that part about they know, but they haven't practiced. Listen, anytime I talk to somebody about the letters, if they don't mention how draining or overwhelming energetically they can be at an astral level, I know they've only worked with it to the mental level. Because when you start working with the astral level of these things, it's going to hand you your ass. It happens every single time. That's non-negotiable. If I talk to somebody about out-of-body travel and they haven't had a real astral travel experience where you're ripping the astral body off of the physical body and just how traumatic that is, particularly the first couple of times, I know they've only done mental wandering. Because the astral body is based off of breath. That's not supposed to leave your physical body. That's a near-death experience level event, which is why when you do it, particularly the first couple of times you do it, it really sucks and it hurts. Okay. Again, that's not to say these individuals don't have skill at other things. Right? That's fine. And this is a bit of a departure, but it's important to understand is that there are 4 or 5 fundamental ways people engage esoterica. Okay. There's the path of the warrior, the path of the doctor, the path of the devotee, the path of the artist, and the path of the guy that essentially balances these other 4 things. Okay. Those people are all going to have radically different approaches to things. So if you're a guy like Virgil, right, who takes a largely, say, devotee kind of approach to esoterica, path of service kind of thing, you're going to have a very different experience of this than, say, somebody who's on the warrior path, whose job it is to confront evil and destroy all demons. That technology and how you engage it and what you do with it is going to be very, very, very different. Almost alien in some degrees. The path of an artist who explores God through creation to expose God. Very different than a path of, say, a doctor whose job it is to alleviate suffering. Again, These are just different ways of looking at things,
Hmm.
none of which are incorrect, by the way. But to someone from outside that particular kind of group of people, the experiences of one group of people can seem absolutely alien, completely bonkers, and quote unquote wrong. Well, again, a devotee, somebody who experiences divinity through service, karma yoga, right? Very different experience than someone who honors God through the act of creation, i.e., an artist. Those are two very different ways to approach that end goal. And so that's where I think a lot of the confusion comes in, is people are talking over each other and not making the attempt to understand the other person's viewpoint. But again, without a certain amount of experience in other things, they may simply not be able to understand it at all.
Yeah.
And that's human nature, man. That works.
You know, the more I sort of work through these practices, there's understanding and comprehension that arises that I couldn't have even conceived of without doing the practices themselves. You know,
Yeah.
and Mark Rasmus talks about this. He says, "Look, man, you can talk about this stuff all you want." This, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but there's going to be an unfolding of understanding that you cannot conceive of. You can't have a comprehension of it until it happens, and it's going to be highly personalized in a lot of cases too. So this is I think part of the something that gets left out a bit is this, like, man, this is an awesome adventure, you know, in all aspects.
Sure.
And you know, it's not, you know, it's, you're going to get what you get. Okay. Okay, and this is you brought this up, and I love this. Okay, how it can help your spiritual path in general. Now, obviously, the more you work through these things, you may start attracting attention. You essentially, in some places, some people talk about you get a beacon on your head, and you start attracting the attention of people. They know that you know, in a sense, and they can see
right.
you, right? And so the way that spirits will treat you.
Very different. Because this is the thing. If you do something like IIH, you get your basic training in, you can see the invisible world, you can work with it. You've got your own Akasha, so you can make it go away when it wants to show up and you don't want it to be there. Fair enough. If you go to spirit magic first, the spirit can't just show you how to do something. They have to go into you, flip the switches, and make something happen. So there's a dependency. Okay. Now, this is normal. You know, this is where things like medicine Buddha empowerments and healing gods and, you know, martial gods and all this other kind of stuff come in. Through this kind of spirit possession, i.e., what we call deity fusion, a partnership forms between you and the entity, and it comes in and allows you to do things that otherwise you couldn't do. But there's a dependency there. Without the entity there, you can't do it. When you learn practices like KTQ, when you learn to work with the Kabbalah proper, letter magic, now the entity just has to show you how to do it. Because now you can identify the energetic forms and you can do it on your own. You can, again, copy them and repeat. In theory, with ritual magic, that's there too, where you just continue to use the ritual until you don't need the ritual anymore. But again, the number of people from the ritual community I've met over the years that have figured that out or gotten there, you can literally count on, you know, one hand. Damien Eccles happens to be one of those. John Michael Greer happens to be another, again, but that's fairly rare. That's the difference between learning letter magic and not learning letter magic. And that's the reason why I like to learn letter magic first and teach it first, because it gives my students a more equal footing to engage these entities with. The result of which is the entities, oh, I don't have to hang around all the time. I can just show up when you need me. Awesome. So it also changes the nature of that relationship as well. Keeping in mind, the ability of an entity to turn off that internal resistance to this kind of thing is going to be far greater than your ability to work with letter magic in the beginning. So, you know, letter magic is a slower process. but it gives you more of your free will back and gives you more opportunity that simply learning spirit magic generally doesn't. And that's assuming you've got really good clairvoyance and really good clairaudience. If you don't have very good clairvoyance and very good clairaudience, and you start doing spirit magic, yeah, you'll know how to do things all of a sudden when you summon the entity involved, but who knows what kind of deal you're signing up for. Yeah, that's a whole other issue. Letter magic, you can have very basic clairvoyance and clairaudience and go really far because you'll meet an entity, they'll show you how to do something, then you just go off and do it on your own. That's the reason why I like to teach that way.
So thank you so much. And I'm going to take advantage of the technology that I've got here, and I'm going to pull this image up here. And what we have here is the symbol on the front of Bardon's third book, Key to the True Kabbalah. And this is where I've highlighted or put in bold on the question sheet, the KTQ long game. And essentially, could you just talk about this symbol for us, please?
Okay, yeah. This is what always amazes me, because when I bring this up, people get the 1,000-yard stare. All right, the stuff in the center clearly represents the elements in their fusion into Akasha. Ta-da! Okay. That's primarily what's taught in the third book. The next ring out are the planets. That's primarily what's taught in the second book. This is where Bardon's works ended. It's unfortunate. Listen, the man gave us a lot. He was amazingly generous with what he did, but he died early. It happened. That's a fact. Okay. The next ring out are the zodiac. Okay. If you give a careful or not so careful reading of the second book, he talks a lot about the zodiac and the different spirits' relationships to it. And come on here, guys. You know, he's trying to send a message. The fourth ring is the power of the Sephiroth. Now, here's the funny part about all that. There are Jewish works that look exactly like this thing that replace all of that stuff with Hebrew characters. So it's pretty clear where Bardon got this from. I mean, come on, he called the third book Key to the True Kabbalah, right? But he lived in a point in time where anti-Semitism, the Nazi Party, a whole bunch of other things were going on. Probably couldn't go forward with that. Okay, fair enough. The other thing to keep in mind is that the elements in this construct are representing vital or etheric energy. The planets are representing astral energy. The zodiac is representing mental level energy. And that Sephirotic area on the outskirts is representing Akashic energy, which is easy to understand when you read a book like Paths of Wisdom by Greer, where he talks about the 4 different levels that each of the Sephiroth can be organized or manifested at. What's even more curious is if you read the second book, he even details an entity that can teach you how to explore the extrasolar region. So the outer planets were clearly on his mind as well. Again, the man died before, all of this could be fleshed out properly, but that's clearly the meta system that he had involved. Now, I'm most of the way done working from the letters all the way out to the Sephiroth. A difference between the Asian or Eastern approach, what we used to call the Oriental approach to this, is those groups are largely concerned, with the exception of the Taoists, with the upward movement or the path of enlightenment. The key difference between Eastern meditative practice and Western meditative practice at the end of the day is Eastern meditative practice is largely concerned with that upward movement towards the path of enlightenment. And the Western practices are concerned with both the path of enlightenment and the path of return. Some call the path of manifestation, where you're working back down to the physical. At the end of the day, that's really the only big difference between the two, leaving out all the egregoric and philosophical and other kind of stuff. I'm just talking technology and its endpoints. And that's Interesting. Now, again, there are even exceptions within these societies. You know, the Essenes were a group of people who rejected the physical body and thought the physical world was evil. All right. Not that different from some of the crazier Buddhist sects out there. And listen, the Taoists invented writing and warfare and medicine in China. So they were definitely concerned with the physical. But that's what the key to the true Kabbalah, that sigil, that symbol on the front page is outlining. It's outlining Bardon's meta system. And, that's my work is devoted to creating coursework to support all that. So, but again, a lot of times when I talk about this, people get a very deer in headlights type vision of what's going on, if that's fair. Yeah, just fine.
Cool. So, if we look at it from the perspective of, so if we look at the middle of the symbol, that's the Akasha, right? That's the point in which.
Well, yeah. That's where the four elements fuse into Akasha. Sure.
Right. Sorry. Okay. And sort of it's an outward type projection.
Yeah.
Would you say? Okay. I'm sorry. I am going to attempt to oversimplify this, and please correct me. But essentially, you have these four elements, and you see element systems in so many of the traditions around the world, and not all of them maybe have the void as an element, so to speak.
Right.
But you generally will just stay with earth, fire, air, and water, and then each of the Kabbalistic letters in Bardon's system generally relate to one of the four elements, and also there's also Akashics as well. So if we just stick to the four classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water, you've got these landmarks or milestones on the spectrum, which are the mother letters, right? Which are the main letters, which we see are, basically, SCH, A, umlaut A, and M. And then the other letters, like if we take the air element, for example, which is the A, and then we have Z and we have L, and we kind of have a C in there as well. And what's the other one? That's about it, isn't it? There's only a few air letters.
Yeah, and C again is a hybrid letter. It's both fire and air.
Yeah, right. Perfect. That's it.
And H can be fire and air too, depending on how you want to deal with it.
Yeah, great. Perfect. Thank you. And so what happens is, if we look at it, say, okay, I just don't happen to have a copy of the book here. So if this was a book and this was about the air element and it was the A, would the letters of, say, L, C, and a little bit of H and Z, would they be chapters in the book of A, so to speak? Or is that not quite the right way of looking at it?
I would say each one of the letters could be an encyclopedic length work on their own.
Yes.
But generally speaking, the other letters kind of fall under A. And that's the reason why you have the mother letters, right? This is like the main tuning fork in there. And then everything else everything else spreads in both directions outward from that. Now, you get some weird stuff out there that's kind of hard to account for, like the letter T or, the letter Y. But in general, that's what you're winding up with. Or the letter R, which is a backdoor for access to the sun sphere. Most people who work with that the first time, if they're not super careful, get a big surprise they weren't expecting. But generally speaking, all of the other letters spread out from the mother letters.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so next on the list here, prerequisites for training the third book in Bardon's system. Now, some things are going to be helpful, and then it's like, well, actually, you just got to start somewhere. So could you share some insights into prerequisites?
Yeah, sure. Ideally, if you can hold 3-point concentration, color, sound, and sensation, you're good to go. 5 minutes of each. That's really the base, what you need. That said, these things will work whether you can do that or not. Okay, and this is where we kind of get back to this concept of these powers are fundamental to how the universe is constructed. I've been told, even though I never met the man, that one of the reasons why Dexheimer pulled all of his books from circulation and destroyed all the copies that were remaining that he could get his hands on was that teaching the third book as mantric worked a little too well, and people were being dumb with it. Again, I've never met the man. I don't know if that's true or not, but you will run into people in things like Shingi or Five Element Fist who have the energy sensitivity of your boot, okay, who do the forms properly and visualize the color, the sound, and the sensation associated with that energy, and they can be really strong. Now, again, they have no subtlety to what they do because they can't interact with a thing properly, but it works just fine. And that's why when I teach people this stuff, okay, if someone were learning in person from me, right, not distance learning, but actually learning in person from me today, and they could take instruction very well, I would gang press them through being able to generate the mother letters in their own Akasha. And then I would have them practice the mother letters while doing the throwing exercises 3 to 5 hours a day for about 3 to 4 months. That body training combined with the power of the letters would open most of the other esoteric abilities by itself. But if you don't have the body training, a lot of this other stuff, you have to have technology to work on. In fact, in recent point of contention or discussion with some of my senior students has been, we're all convinced now that there are purely physical ways of generating all of these abilities. We just don't know what they are. So in terms of me, the letters are the easiest way to learn how to establish equilibrium. That's the easiest way to gain access to your own Akasha and your own new non-dual light out there. It's certainly the safest of any of the systems I've seen. And honestly, when done properly, it's the fastest too. So this saving it for the end thing, I'm not really in agreement with. Now, keep in mind, right, depending upon what comes out of gaining your access to your own Akasha, you're still probably going to have to go back and train the single pointed focus and all the, all of the clairvoyant and clairaudient and other skills to get those things up to where you're happy with them. Okay. But again, the point of magic is either enlightenment or accomplishment. The point of magic is not to train a set of skills for 15 years that allow those two things to happen. And again, that's where I think a lot of people get kind of caught up in the details and aren't really looking at the end game. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. I think that something I've discovered is like these things are really fun to explore and see what happens. Like wowee, check this out, right? And then it's like, okay, after a while, it's like when they become normalized, it's well, maybe I should use these things for something, like have a stated outcome or a goal to put them towards, because, and these are essentially evolution technologies to sort of help things move along here. You're almost at the vanguard on the leading edge, trying to keep the species moving forward, and leveraging these things to make the world a better place. I don't know, maybe.
Again, that's kind of the whole point. People, as you know, I tend to try to avoid the purely philosophical discussions in this community because they don't generally go anywhere. There's nothing actionable that comes out of that. Fair enough. But, again, what's fundamental to my worldview and what I've seen of the higher esoteric realms, incarnating here is a whole world of trouble. Really hard to do. Takes a lot of effort. And you're doing it in order to accomplish things here. the physical world is not a place that is designed for or encourages you to hang out. That's not what's going on here. People can debate the role of the physical world as a leadership laboratory or as a way to explode and improve your spiritual development in a way that you can't in some of these higher realms of existence, and a whole bunch of other things. All right. I'm not going to get into those here because we could yammer on about that for days. People do all the time. But suffice to say, things aren't perfect here because you're designed to learn things while you're here, and you're designed to do things. Reality is not a jailbreak. This is a mistake people make all the damn time. Personally, it's frustrating to me because if you knew me personally, you would know I'm highly involved in the society that I'm from and everything else. Fine. But that's really the bottom line, is that you're here to engage with things and your fellow man. You're not here to check out and hide. Now, again, checking out and hiding can be smart depending upon where you're at and what's going on right now. If Franz Bardon had simply started walking west in 1939, he might have lived a little longer than he did. But that's, in terms of a philosophical background, about as far down that road as I really want to go.
Yep. Cool. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, having an understanding of why are we here? What are the opportunities that we can do here? And yeah, it's good to know. It's good to hear even just some personal sort of view on that. So thank you. And all right. So anyway, so basic theory of KTQ. So you've got these, we're training these three bodies, right? Mm-hmm. And now there's the three bodies and then there's the four poles. And there's a kind of a relationship here. Now, obviously there's a mental level training, which is the visual. And we can also hear things with our spirit body as well, the mental body being equivalent to the spirit body, if we just use that terminology.
Right.
And then, of course, we can train our mental body to experience a type of sensitivity as well, like a sensation, And I think that's obviously, especially what the first book focuses on, is like getting kind of, and Mark Rasmus eloquently puts this, we're basically training clean separation so you can occupy this and experience the functions of the three bodies in their own sort of specific way. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
So, okay. Very, very loosely put. Okay. Really loosely put. Mental level existence is trained via focus and relaxation. Astral level of existence is trained through breath, posture, and sound, because you're training sensation, whether that's, visual, auditory, sense of touch, what we call energy, emotion. You're training sensation. Vital level is trained through essentially metabolism and physicality. Lift the weight, put the weight down. Lift the weight, put the weight down. Really roughly speaking, that's how those three levels of reality are trained. Akashic, non-dual, get a little more convoluted because you have to, generally speaking, be able to do a bunch of things at once to generate this kind of equilibrium on the other three levels of reality to experience that Akashic or non-dual state of being. Interestingly enough, a lot of people, if you really talk to them, get them in private, no cell phones are on, nobody's looking, they're not going to be embarrassed, nobody's going to know, will admit to having had experiences with the Akashic and non-dual levels of reality. But it was accidental. It wasn't something that happened because they were trying to. Just a bunch of random things kind of lined up exactly the right way. Boom, it happened. So that's also where that enlightenment experience isn't as rare as a lot of people make it out to be. Now, the ability to project yourself at will upon demand cleanly into the non-dual / nirvanic realms completely and come back. Yeah, that's pretty uncommon. It's going to take a lot of work for most people. But the actual experience of it really not as rare as people make it out to be. And that's where I would always tell people, divide the philosophy out from what you're trying to do. And if you can do that, you tend to get answers to your questions a lot quicker. That's just my thought.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so here's something. Let's get into a little bit of Bardon and a little bit of 60 skills here.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the training schedule overview as instructed by Mr. Bardon and KTQ is it's funny actually, because there's obviously, like, you look at IIH and there's so much stuff to do in that book, and in KDQ, you know, like, it's very, you know, you're basically training these 27 letters with all the same methodologies. Basically, you're doing a sight, sound, sensation type thing. So, you know, how does your sort of training methodology sort of change from, say, what Mr. Bardon presents?
Most of what Bardon was presenting in his book was really focused on the mental level, to be completely honest with you, which is fine. That's perfectly usable. I go into a lot more detail about how to generate the energies specifically at the different levels of reality. Because the energies manifest differently at different levels of reality, this can greatly increase their utility. So to the degree there's really any difference between what I'm writing about and publishing about and what Bardon published about in terms of the third book, there's really not much of one. You know, people get a mental level initiation by doing my coursework, which is certainly helpful because that energy will bleed down in both directions and make doing stuff at the astral and vital as well as the Akashic and non-dual much easier. People who come to my transmissions, that's more of an astral level transmission because I'm alive and breathing while I'm doing it. Fair enough, and they can pick up on that. But in terms of what I'm doing and what Bardon's doing, there's really not much of a difference there. It's just, while there are people who can teach you the different skills contained in IIH absent Bardon's lineage, in terms of the third book, not really. No. I mean, again, you'll see this stuff in bits and pieces here or there and martial arts and some other things, but there isn't another human being outside, say, Mark Rasmus, you know, that you can go to who can actually show you how to do this stuff. And since it's not practical for a lot of people to spend 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years at a time in Southeast Asia on location, the video coursework that I have opens this up to a bunch of people who simply can't make that trip. And that's also why a lot of people hate me, but that's okay.
I'm on a Franz Bardon Discord, and I see some of the threads there, and it's interesting to hear those types of the conversations there. It just sort of gives me an overview of the sort of the barometer of the climate of sort of people's thought processes. Now, so the word Kabbalah means to receive, is my understanding.
Yeah, I mean that's as good a definition as I've found. Sure. Yeah.
And I heard a phrase once that Malkuth, being the 10th Sephiroth, is essentially where the king speaks and it becomes, or the world is spoken into existence. That's why the Kabbalah is generally sort of seen as, you know, the power of the word.
Right.
And so what we're doing is that we're putting this ball above the head, or we're using that particular approach, and we're driving this energy from here to the mental, to the astral, to the physical, or the vital physical.
Yep.
Now, the common denominator between all of these points is that it's we start with a heard sound, an internalized sound, which we experience at the mental, and then it becomes a quieter sort of like expressed sound at the astral, and then we learn to vibrate it physically. And that is kind of like the common track that of how we pull it or drive it down. I just wanted to share that was my understanding of it anyway.
No, that's exactly it. And, you know, again, if anybody out there had access to the ultra Orthodox community and, you know, a lot of their books and works on this kind of stuff, I think they'd find some really interesting parallels. But for cultural reasons, that's not applicable to most of the people learning this stuff.
Yeah.
It's simply not available to them. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the basic method. And ultimately, when you learn any system of magic, okay, the technologies involved, the really basic technologies, the important ones, are generally relatively simple. Now, frequently you have to be able to do a few of these things at the same time, and that's where it gets hard, and you got to be strong at it. Exactly, right, of course. But the individual skills involved are generally not that complicated. And again, when someone puts something on a pedestal, right, it becomes by definition this unachievable goal.
Yeah.
That's where using my approach of, hey guys, if you can do it for 5 minutes, you're good. That is going to make some people out there in a certain parlance, as we like to say, butthurt regarding that whole process. But guys, for a basic application of this stuff, that's all you really need. And, which is why I consider myself an adept, and I've gotten a certain amount of ability at this, which is great, I guess. But the world is not perfect. To expect our execution of things within it to be perfect is equally delusional. A lot of things, man, you just got to be good enough. Now, again, that means there are going to be people who are going to be better. There are lots of people out there that are better at this stuff than me. You'll probably never meet any of them, but hey, fair enough. Again, that's what people really need to keep in mind, and that this stuff is useful today, right now, with a minimum of training, just as anything else is. But the kid slinging burgers at McDonald's is not the same thing as a burger made by Gordon Ramsay.
No.
You have to respect that as well. So that's kind of where I come with most of this stuff.
Yeah, I've met some amazing musicians who've never left the house with their skill set, and they don't teach. But if you catch them at the right time, you can get your skill set raised up. It's just like you said, some of these things are okay. So now I'm just watching the time there. And I'm going to do some quick fire questions here for you. So first of all, timelines for practice, for developing proficiency.
If you can spend 2 hours a day practicing every day, like a religion, you can finish everything you need to learn from the first book in about 1.5 years. You can titrate downwards from that. In general, all of the skills involved, you need to have the ability to hold for about 5 minutes at a time. There's some exceptions there for certain things involving physical training for obvious reasons, or stuff like astral projection or mental wandering, where simply, again, you're going to want to spend more time out there on that than 5 minutes. But if you can do any of the basic technologies in the first book, or my school for that matter, for 5 minutes apiece, you're good. That's all you need. Now, is that going to be a world-class virtuoso performance? No. You're going to want to do more than that. But 5 minutes at a time, which is why the Mala method, where you just, watching thoughts go 5 minutes, single pointed focus, go 5 minutes, emptiness, vacuity of thought, go 5 minutes, merge with light, go 5 minutes, build the ball 5 minutes, so on through the whole chain of events, actually works really well. I've almost never met anybody who did it that way, but there you go.
Cool. So as far as the letters go, like how many hours are we talking sitting with each letter to get a good soak? So if we're talking about asterisks and obelix was, dropped in the cauldron as a baby and had it for the rest of his life, sort of thing. So he's having a good soak.
10 to 20 hours minimum. That's the practice per letter minimum. Now, by that, by the way, you practice intensely for 2 hours on Monday, run the energy in the background all day long, repeat for 7 to 10 days in a row. Yeah, go on to the next letter. That's fine. That will get you that basic proficiency where you can generate the letter reliably with enough strength to do something with it. Up through about 100 hours, strength builds pretty quickly. From 100 to 400 or 200 to 400 hours of practice, things slow down a lot, but you still get better. After that, it really slows down a lot more. And again, your strength in manifesting all of this is directly related to your ability to hold single point concentration and how much body training you've done. So if you're deficient in either one of those things, it'll be more difficult. And keep in mind, as the great Mark Rasmus says, the energy will do whatever it is you train it to do. So if you're training the energy in a more physical manner through, say, competitive wrestling in the letter D or weightlifting in the letter I, well, that's how the energy is going to manifest for you. So, but really the long and short of it, 10 to 20 hours of practice per letter is enough to be able to generate the letter cleanly. And then you can move on to the next one.
Awesome. Okay. Counterbalancing. All right. So if I'm doing, a fire, air, earth, and water letter each day, are we better to do, like an even spread, like half an hour of each one a day, or more of one type of thing? What do you say?
That's ideal. Half an hour to an hour of each day would be great. Fire, air, water, earth. That's 4 hours of work, mate. Not a whole lot of people are going to do that. Yeah. If you need to split them up, like 2 hours one day and 2 hours the next. So, okay, do fire and water one day and air and earth the next. And then the day after that, flip them. So you do water, then fire, and then earth, then air. Because generally speaking, the letter you generate first will get the most developmental potential out of. And the second letter is basically about neutralizing. Also keeping in mind that I've never met anybody who generate the same level of intensity on the second hour of practice that they did in the first. So, if you're feeling really overwhelmed by a letter, say fire, right? And you're burning all over and you're manic and acting like a crazy person because you just had an awesome hour-long practice of, hill sprints and throwing kettlebells around and everything else. It may take you a couple hours of water letter work to neutralize that. So
cool. Thank you. All right, here we go. So do's and don'ts. What's something that you should not do, for example? This is probably good.
Don't get involved with spirit magic until you have your own Akasha non-dual light. Otherwise, you're just going to end up being the finger puppet for something at some point. And you may never get past that. Sorry, kids, them's the breaks. These things don't have bodies. They can heckle you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Don't go throwing that switch until you can at least have some control over when they show up and when they leave.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And I just want to say, too, that everyone, you can get Bob's book, Bob and Rawdon Phobos's book, Initial Experiences with the Kabbalah, and there's some footnotes in there about some placements of the letters in certain organs and practice tips to avoid things. Bob's put himself on the front line there and taken a couple of hits for the team. Bless him. So, yeah. And okay. And just to finish things off quickly, I'm going to rattle off a few everyday activities and what letters you would quickly associate with those. So let's say you're making food. What was
letter
it?
C.
What your letter C? Perfect. Okay. What about going for a walk?
A.
Okay. What about having a workout, like doing doing arms and chest or something?
D or I, depending upon what you're working on.
What about Qigong?
Generally letter B.
Okay, cool. What about reading a book?
Letter A. Could be letter Z, like if you're a comedian and you want to work on your comedy or artistic skills.
Okay. What about hosting a Dungeons and Dragons tabletop games session?
Oh, geez. Probably letter N. You want to widen everybody's mental space and kind of get them on the same page.
Okay, cool. All right. Let's see. Date night with the missus.
Oh, oof. That's a tough one. So a lot of people are going to say the letter J because it's that lovey-dovey feeling.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I found that when men generate a lot of letter J, women find it very repulsive. Just like, almost unearthly repulsive. So because it's kind of androgynous and a little fruity, and ultimately they don't really like that. So probably more letter D.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Growing a business.
Letter G to attract opportunity. Letter K to get the work done.
Okay, cool. And making friends.
Ooh, generally more of a letter M, kind of magnetic type thing.
Okay, and so that would probably count for like if you're a salesperson and you're wanting to attract people.
Yeah, definitely.
What about manifestation?
Really depends upon what you're working on.
Yeah, that's a bit too. Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah. What about a couple of last ones? Doing the dishes.
Depends what kind of dishwasher you are. You know, if you're kind of one of those disassociative, let's think about something while I'm doing this so I can pretend I'm not doing it. Probably the letter N. If you're the kind of person where they sit over there for 3 weeks at a time until they're, you know, about to fall over and rats are starting to show up, probably the letter K, because it's going to force you to do something you don't want to do.
Perfect. Okay. Playing guitar.
Oh, definitely letter Z. Yeah, that's
Awesome.
artistic expression for sure. Yeah,
totally. Okay, cool. All right. And one last one, studying, just general study.
A more than not. Yeah. A or a 2-letter combination involving the letter A for sure.
Okay. And then of course, another conversation for another time is all formulas and things that go on from there. But Bob, hey, thank you so much, man. This has been another fantastic conversation, and you're very generous with your knowledge and your open-hearted sharing. I'm very grateful. And is there anything you'd like to part with before
we will have the planetary Kabbalah or the Spirit Kabbalah course out by the end of April. So be looking for that. Otherwise, as usual, guys, 60skills.com is a place to go, and train hard and be well.
And one last thing from me, remember to vent.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Bob.
No problem, man. Take care.